I love to babysit. I'm 17 and sure, a lot of kids my age work in fast food and get a more stable source of income, but I take babysitting over a job at McDonald's any day. I'm good with little kids, and they always seem to take a shine to me. I'm pretty sure I'm the fun babysitter, because I play a lot of games and let them stay up a little later than they usually might, while still ensuring that they're in bed at a reasonable time and always tidy up after any mess the kids make. I have a good rep with parents in my neighborhood because I'm a trusted babysitter who always keeps the kids safe and entertained. However, an experience I had the night before last while babysitting in my neighborhood has made me never want to babysit again. It was a Friday night, and I had got a job babysitting for a couple who had recently moved into the biggest house in town. A 6-bedroom white monstrosity with a long driveway that always seemed a little too flashy for our small town, like an oversized wedding cake that had fallen in the midst of a street of humble townhouses, complete with balconies and floor-to-ceiling windows on the front. The house had been empty for a long time before the couple had bought it a few months ago. Friday was not my first time sitting for the couple, as I had looked after their kids, Corey, age 7, and Taylor, age 4, twice before, earlier in the year. The parents were always nice and always paid well, and I had gotten really well with Corey and Taylor, who had apparently requested that I babysit for them again. So, when I saw the text from their mother asking whether I was available on Friday, I jumped at the opportunity gladly. I arrived at the house at 6 in the evening and talked to the parents for a while in the hallway while they told me about where they were going on their night out, and we sorted out arrangements for bedtimes and dinner, etc., as they didn't plan to be back too late, but expected their kids to be in bed at 9. After they'd left, I went into the large living room. The interior of the house was grand and immaculately clean and tidy, with the kind of Art Deco theme that reminded me a little of the design of the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. The downstairs was complete with a high ceiling and an elaborate dual staircase with a balcony at the top that looked down upon the living room, where I found Corey and Taylor sitting on a lavish Art Deco styled rug playing Kaplunk. When they saw me, they ran to give me a hug, both eagerly jabbering to tell me about the games they planned to play with me that evening and their days at school. I bent to hug and greet them both. However, at that moment, I noticed another child that I had not met before, sitting, piling marbles on top of the plastic Kaplunk game. "Corey, is that your friend?" I asked, as the boy was around his age. I felt privately irritated that the kids' parents were expecting me to babysit not only their children, but an additional child. It wasn't that I really minded, but I thought that the parents would have the decency to tell me that I was looking after a friend of their kids too. "Yep, this is my friend. He's staying for a sleepover," he said, gesturing to Victor, who smiled up at me, but didn't say anything. The boy was very pale and almost albino in appearance, with very light eyes. He was extremely scruffy, with faded clothes and light hair that needed a trim, but he otherwise was in normal appearance, except for the fact that he was not wearing any kind of school uniform like Corey and Taylor were. "Do you go to school with Corey, Victor?" I asked the child kindly. "No, I don't go to school," he replied, with no further explanation, which I thought was kind of strange, but probably not true. A lot of kids make things up, right? The evening passed uneventfully, although Corey fell over while running and mildly grazed his knee, but it wasn't bleeding and he got up laughing. The floors were ridiculously slippery. This house was totally unsuitable for kids, I thought, examining a hanging rack of kitchen utensils which suspended a particularly nasty-looking long carving knife. Other than that, The evening ran smoothly. We played board games and ate chicken nuggets and pasta that I made them for dinner. Victor was extremely quiet the whole time, almost unnervingly so, but I put it down to him being shy. To be honest, I sympathized with the feeling of being a little shy, especially around people I didn't know too well, and around loud, confident kids like Corey and Taylor who could make it hard to get a word in edgeways, as I'd been a shy kid myself. So I made a conscious effort to be especially kind to Victor and make him feel at home. By the time we'd finished dinner, hide and seek was suggested by Taylor, and by this point, I was glad to have some peace and quiet that hiding in the big house would promise. "I love hide and seek," said Victor, a beaming smile crossing his face. "Will you count to 100? He asked me. I was taken aback. It was one of the first things I'd heard him say all evening. "Sure I will. I love hide and seek too," I replied warmly. I counted first, hearing the 3 kids go thundering up the first flight of stairs as I counted in the living room, allowing an extra long interval between the numbers as I counted to 100 out loud, so that they had a chance to get settled in their hiding spots. After I finished counting, I climbed one of the duo staircases and made a show of loudly exclaiming, "They're clearly not behind the door," or "Guys, you sure are good at hiding," as I walked from room to room upstairs, knowing that they'd be listening gleefully from their hiding places, shushing each other and listening out for my footsteps. I was just peering out from under my 3rd bed when I heard a piercing scream come from the end of the hallway, which could only have been Taylor. All pretenses dropped. I sprinted to the end of the hall where the scream had come from to find Taylor cowering on the windowsill, curtains half closed, framed against the background of an inky sky, the room only illuminated by the dim glow of the hallway light shining on a face crumbled up in fear and anguish. I ran to her, lifting her off the low windowsill, hugging her and sitting on the bed, patting her back until her tears stopped. Once she had calmed down a bit, I asked her what was the matter, and she blubbered in a tearful voice that Victor was scaring me, before turning to look towards the door and glancing around the room, strangely stopping to gaze fearfully at the top of the high wardrobe and whispering, "I don't like Victor." "What did Victor do, honey?" I asked. No reply. I repeated the question, but Taylor sat silently, sobbing in my lap. A thought struck me, and I looked around confused, as I had not heard Victor leave the room, and he could only have left by passing me in the hallway. I didn't see him, but clearly he wasn't here. I was also surprised that Corey hadn't abandoned the game and come running when he heard his sister's screams, as he was usually fiercely protective of her. She was sitting in my lap, hugging me, head buried in my shoulder, but still was on edge minutes after I found her. I was bewildered by this strange behavior from Taylor, who was usually a very calm, easygoing girl, and left wondering what Victor could have possibly done that could have scared her this much. "Taylor, why do you keep looking at the top of the closet?" I asked cautiously. "That's where Victor was," she said in a whisper, so quiet that it was barely audible. Taylor must have felt me stiffen as I absorbed the information that Victor was on top of the closet. Not only is unsupervised climbing on furniture a big concern for a babysitter, but it was physically impossible for anybody to have gotten up there, especially in a couple of minutes. It was easily 10 foot tall and had the same Art Deco theme as the rest of the house. And, this is hard to explain, the wardrobe went slightly outwards near the top. There was nothing surrounding it to boost yourself up on, and there was no way anyone, let alone a small child like Victor, could get up there. Sitting there in the dim light in the silent bedroom, I suddenly felt a chill creep down my spine. I glanced at the clock and saw that it was 8:30, almost bedtime, I thought. Relieved, I had an excuse to put the children in beds and end the disastrous hide-and-seek game. Hey, it looks like bedtime to me. Now, let's go find the boys and get you all into bed. I think we're all a bit overexcited, aren't we? I reassured Taylor in a light voice. But as we left, I switched every light on as I walked down the hall. I walked hand in hand with Taylor, calling Victor and Corey's names as we eliminated the rooms we'd looked in. We took to calling, "We're not playing anymore," and "The game's over, come out now, guys." But still, no sound. I knew the boys were upstairs, as I knew all the children had gone up there, and had heard none of them go back down. However, I became more uncertain as the silence rang on, broken only by our calls that echoed sinisterly off the high ceiling. After all the upstairs rooms had been eliminated, we headed downstairs to look. I started to feel genuinely panicked after 15 more minutes searching, and neither boy had been found. The house was big, but there was minimal clutter and few hiding places, especially as I was still skeptical that they could be downstairs at all. While searching the kitchen for a third time, now flinging open cabinets frantically and calling in a high, panicked voice, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The unforgiving-looking knife I'd seen suspended from the knife rack was missing from its place. I felt sick as I raced into the living room to grab my phone, deciding that it was time to call the kids' parents, as I was in a state of utter panic by this point, practically dragging a bewildered Taylor by the hand. I scrabbled in the sofa cushions for my phone, glancing around the room a final, desperate time, when I saw a shadow at the top of the dual staircase that made my stomach flip. The sickening silhouette of Victor holding the cruel knife to Corey's throat, staring right at me, the strange smile back on his face, the blade gleaming in the darkness. There was a split second where I was frozen in shock before Taylor began to scream, at which point I sprinted up one of the staircase, ready to grab the knife out of Victor's hand. But he saw me coming and ran, faster than I could, in the other direction, still clutching the knife, leaving Corey shaking but unharmed on the floor. Victor darted down the hallway, into the room at the end of the hall where I found Taylor, and slamming the door behind him. I scooped up Corey with shaking hands and carried him back downstairs to his sister. I sat on the sofa with both Corey and Taylor in my lap. Both were crying hysterically. At that moment, I grabbed my phone and feverishly called Corey and Taylor's parents again and again, but they weren't picking up. After 3 calls went to voicemail, I was about to call the police when I heard the door begin to open up, and with a wave of relief, I heard the voices of the kids' parents arriving home. When they saw Taylor and Corey still awake, their mother looked angry, but then noticed their tears and rushed over to us, scooping up the anguished children. We all began to talk at once to the bewildered adults, both children still crying. The kids' father silenced us and gestured to talk to me. I told them everything that had just happened. I'm sure they thought I was crazy, because they looked at each other in stunned silence once I'd finished my story, but did not give any response. After a few seconds of silence, the children's father left the room and returned less than a minute later, clutching a gun. We all went upstairs to look, led by the children's father as he entered the bedroom at the end of the upstairs hallway. He slammed the door open. there was nobody in there. The windows were locked and bolted, and there was no way that Victor could have left the house, but he was simply not there. Taylor, Corey and I gaped in amazement as we looked at the empty room. The children's mother and father looked at each other knowingly as they observed the seemingly undisturbed bedroom. I felt suddenly embarrassed for my display of hysterics, under the rational gaze of these two stern-looking adults, and even begun to question whether I had experienced some kind of hallucinogenic episode, as the whole evening's events seemed almost impossible, when I noticed Taylor pointing a quivering finger at the top of the room. I followed her gaze and saw a silver glimmer on the top of the tall wardrobe. Her father noticed too, and slowly reached to retrieve the sharp kitchen knife that Victor had been holding. An hour passed and the police had been called, along with my own parents. I was huddled under a blanket, drinking hot tea with my mother's arms around me. Taylor and Corey's mother had taken them to their grandparents' house, and the police were still searching upstairs. We were sticking around because the police might need to talk to me again. Corey and Taylor's father came over to talk to me. He was clutching a piece of paper. He apologized profusely for my trauma before sitting at my side warily. "Have the police contacted Victor's family?" I asked him tentatively. There was a pause before he quietly said, almost to himself, "They've been playing with Victor since we moved in. They've talked to him like he's really there, replying like he was a real child. We thought Victor was the children's imaginary friend." He quietly held up the piece of paper he had been clutching. It was a children's drawing with a date from a few weeks before in the corner. The picture, though childish, clearly showed the enormous white exterior of their house. Outside stood a stick-figure boy with pale hair, eyes and skin, smiling sinisterly, holding a silver knife.